for this session, I was with Ian Thompson in a conference back in, I can't remember, was it 2 or 3 years ago? And we sat, we stood to one side. I think we had I had a poster, and Ian came and had a chat with me, and he basically said, look out across the floor. And there must have been 250, 300 people present. And he said, how many people with disabilities are in the room? Okay, and this was quite a high-profile, elite sport environment without trying to give too much away. And from then on, I was like, oh my gosh, we do need to include people with disability in our understanding of sport. But also that's been part of my kind of PhD and research journey, based off some of the work that Haley. Oh, there you are. I can't see with the mask. So Professor Haley Fitzgerald now was on my supervisory team and actually was part of the recruitment process for getting me into my PhD at Leeds Beckett originally. And I can remember the interview process, and I had this grand plan of doing a PhD on coaching expertise, just interview some coaches and then do some analyze some data, and that was it really. So, and then Haley said to me, how do you understand disability? Or I'm like, what do you mean? How do I understand disability? And so that began a kind of a journey in terms of, I need to learn quite a lot here. And one of the things that was key for me in my learning was, how do I release the voice of people with disability, or in our understanding of coaching, how do we understand coaching from the voices of athletes? Because they're part of the coaching process. So it's the coach, the athlete, the context. And often what we found is that, whether it's coach education or coaching research, that the voices of athletes are missing from our understanding of coaching. It's like, what? So my PhD journey started quite a while ago, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing a number of para-athletes in our understanding of coaching, and I've shared some incredible insights. And I've also had the privilege of spending time with these guys in terms of athletics as well, learning and listening to their voices as well. I'm not necessarily getting it right myself as a coach, but the conversations that I've had and spending time in camps, and I think, Ali Jawad, I think we met probably pre-Beijing, I think it was.
Yeah. Oh wow. I'm not that old.
Well, I am, just get used to it. No, but I think we met quite a while ago, and it was you didn't even qualify in powerlifting yet, did you? You had aspirations, but you didn't.
I made Beijing.
So I met you pre-Beijing though.
Yeah, so it was 2006.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, then I did not think I was going to get there.
Yeah. So, and he did, so that was an incredible start in terms of seeing Ali before he kind of hit the limelight and the hard work to where he got to, and I'll let Maria introduce him. But even then, I was learning quite a lot. And then with Maria, who I've asked to be part of the Para Coach, Maria's Coaching Corner. So if you've not come across that, Maria's been interviewing coaches and athletes about the coaching process, their understanding, because within the Erasmus bid, we didn't have enough funds to stretch the athlete's voice. So I'm thinking, that doesn't really bother me, we're going to do something to release her voice. And I met Maria when she was 14 and started to coach her because basically she didn't have any coach, a coach that would coach her. And she taught me a lot about coaching, about how to meet athletes' needs. And so she's now doing a degree in coaching up in Scotland. And for me, this is just a part of her journey in terms of understanding coaching and helping her where I can to not only grow as a coach, but actually get connected with you guys. And you'll find out that if you spend any time speaking to Maria, she will nail you with a question. Okay, I think she did an outstanding question to the guys yesterday. And then we've got Laura Sugar, again, who was part of the athletics, but I'll let Maria go into that. But I just want to say, just thank you, Maria, for your commitment and your time, and to Ali and Laura for your time today. And be released to share whatever you feel that is necessary to get across. Okay.
No, brilliant. No, thank you very much for having me. And kind of just to add on to what Tabo was saying, like we've had questions before as to why we're interviewing athletes, why we've got an athlete leading discussions, and I kind of, for like any kind of relationship, if it's professional or like a personal relationship, you need like the voices of like the two people so that it can work. So I'm really pleased today to be joined along with like my fellow Paralympics GB teammates. First of all, we've got Laura Sugar. Laura has just come back from Tokyo as Paralympic champion in para canoe in 200 metres. Laura was also one of my teammates in athletics. She was a Paralympic finalist in Rio. I've also got Ali here. Ali's quite famous within like the world of para sport. He's a multi-medalist in powerlifting, so he's won medals at Paralympics, Worlds and Commonwealth Championships. So firstly, just thank you very much for joining me again today. And kind of one of I'd like to, for us who've not, like some of us don't really know a bit about you and your sport, so could you kind of tell us a bit about your sport and the demands of the sport? So,
so as Maria mentioned, I was actually part of athletics too. I was one of the people that was, even before athletics, I was actually in hockey, and I never knew that my disability was eligible for Paralympic sport. I kind of think you see the blade athletes or the wheelchair athletes, and you don't see kind of as many disabilities, and I was one of the ones that watched London 2012 and literally saw Dan Greaves, some people might have come across here, and just saw his foot and went, I've got that foot. Got into athletics from there, knew I was quite fast, and kind of went through the ranks, and then actually went through the talent transfer process from UK Sport in 2018 and moved across to para canoe. It's very similar to athletics in style of racing. I was saying to Maria, it's straight line as fast as you can, 200 metres, you just sat on your bum rather than running. So, the training principles are really, really similar, but there's probably a bit more volume in the boat just because you can, because it's not so weight bearing. Very, very similar like kind of principles. The transition was really quick for me across from athletics to para canoe. Still a speed-based sport, but for the 200 metres in para canoe, it takes probably between 46 and 50 seconds, so you've got that bit more speed endurance in there. But for me, again, with para canoe, I saw the billboards with the wheelchair athlete on them, and I never knew that I was eligible, and it was when they actually approached Paula, my head coach from athletics, and they approached her about me. Otherwise, I'd have never got involved in the sport. I wouldn't have known. I just carried on with athletics and thought, I have a desire just to say yes to things, which quite often gets me in sticky positions, but this one turned out really well, and the para canoe say that goes right from my disability with a fused ankle all the way to kind of mid-spine injuries, and so it's a real eye-opener for me getting into that sport, and going from one of the most popular Paralympic sports and like numbers-wise to one of the lesser-known ones, and kind of being on those both sides of I didn't realise kind of in athletics how kind of lucky we were with all the kind of opportunities we got. Then coming into canoe and trying to get that kind of wider out there, as well as the different disabilities involved in it. So I'm still quite new-ish to the sport, and I'm not changing again soon. I'm staying there.
Yeah, so I've had, I guess throughout my career I've only had one sport, only because I'm not very good at anything else. I certainly don't want to run. So,
You run?
Yeah, I know. So I've been part of the World Class programme since I was 16, so about, 16 years ago. Okay. Yeah, so quite a long time. And my sport's all about bench press, so I know people look at going to the gym, and basically my sport is bench press. I try to lift heavy weights, so I lie down and lift heavy weights and then sleep in between sets. I think the challenge that I had was that classification wasn't really a thing in my sport. It's all about body weights, because all the impairments actually compete against each other, which is actually very different from other events. So I wasn't really used to that when I first got to the team. But actually, the kind of the big issue was actually weight, like having to live a life that was quite strict in terms of being like near body weight all the time, making sure that your body composition was, you know, the most optimal it can be. So obviously, I couldn't just, you know, eat what I wanted or kind of do what I wanted. And I know a lot of, like, obviously in athletics, there's no optimal way to run. So yeah, so I had to learn quite quickly of just like how to live a life that was actually away from the gym, which was quite tough. But also what kind of got me into the sport was the ridiculous weights that human beings can actually lift. Like, we are talking about women that can bench press 1.5 to 2 times the body weight, and you've got men nearing 4 times the body weight bench. That is remarkable. And I just thought to myself, this sport, even though it's one of the it's not the most popular sport back then, but the fact that if we compare them to the able-bodied equivalent, we are probably better. And nobody knew that at the time. So I guess for me, like, what attracted me to the sport was to try to be the strongest person on the planet in my body weight. Not thinking I was going to be very, very hard. And also the caveat to that is, even though classification isn't a thing for us, unfortunately in our sport, doping is a big thing. So from a very early age, quite a lot of transparency in terms of the sport is quite bad, but we'll give you all the resources to try and bridge that gap. It's whether or not you want to kind of go pursue another Paralympic sport where you can probably get to the top level quicker, or do you really want to invest in yourself and in the process and kind of get to a level that so it probably took about 7 years to get to a very top level. That's a long time, but I chose to commit, and luckily I've done pretty well. But now my body's aching and I feel like an old man. So yeah, don't do powerlifting.
You should come to Canada. They ask us to eat more all the time.
They tried to dad me a couple of years ago.
They make you eat more in the winter.
Yeah.
So you have to watch it.
So yes, I've kind of like told a little bit about the demands of the sports, but like, how does your impairment come into it? So is there any adaptations that need to be made, or any other kind of considerations, or is it just fairly quite straightforward?
So for me, I'll kind of relate it to both sports, because a big thing for me when I came into athletics from hockey is I repeatedly kind of tore my hamstring. And for me, I've always been wonky, so my left leg's about an inch shorter than my right, as well as, and I don't also have the movement or a calf muscle. But I kind of got away with it a bit in hockey, and I kind of thought I just turned my hamstring because of hockey. But then actually in athletics, realise once you then get, you know, onto world class program, you get that support around you. You realise that it's all came from my back and being wonky. So a huge thing for me was getting my shoes adapted that I've got done at a place in Sheffield. Since I think I had my last kind of big injury, I think you remember I was in Doha.
Oh, yeah.
I was in Doha actually at the World Championships, and I was in the holding camp and tore my hamstring really badly. And since then I've had my shoes adapted, and they put rockers on my shoes to help that movement, but also the height, and touch wood, I've not had a single hamstring injury since. But it's taken getting it into that kind of world-class setup and having real, like, you know, doctor physios look at me to realise that. Whereas now I kind of see, I've met people with the same disability or people with leg length discrepancy, and they've said they've had kind of pain in their back, and I've just sent them straight to this place, Foot Labs in Sheffield, that charge £15 a shoe. Literally, it's the most simple thing to go and do, and they literally have to send like a box of shoes of different like day shoes, trainers, extra. So yeah, that for me has been a huge learning curve, and it's not just for people with my disability, but yeah, different movements they can do, rockers, they can do height changes, and that's a huge thing. And then also moving into the boat, I didn't realise how much you use your legs, so I was like, oh, my disability doesn't get involved in it. With kayaking, it's a lot about how you push your feet, and I can't do that. And again, I was quite wonky in the boat, so actually my whole foot plate we now have built up for my foot, and I can't push with my foot, so we've put in a contraption in the bottom so I can maybe try and pull a bit with my leg as well. But it's kind of that they say I've kind of had to, there's been no one before me with the same disability, so every time there's someone with a new disability, you go and figure it out for yourselves, and then you try and pass that on to someone else. So hopefully now, then down the line, when we've got more disabilities like that, we can kind of not wait 5 years before we make that change, but it does take kind of trying new things and always kind of adapting and trying. And I still, like, as I'm using to clearing, I'm still sure there's more things that we're going to put in the boat to help me be a bit more level. But that's all it is for me.
So ours is quite simple. We have an adapted bench, which is a little bit wider and bigger for more support. And you have to be strapped down to the bench, because with my short leg, if it comes off the bench, I get disqualified. So I'm strapped down to make sure that both my stumps are on the bench. Apart from that, they're the adaptations you expect on international level anyway, because it's part of the rules. Also, it's for safety as well. So I can bench on able-bodied benches, but having 3 times body weight being very wonky is not really a good idea. And a lot of gyms kind of don't want me in there just in case I hurt myself when I'm really insured. So yeah, like for us, the adaptations are quite simple.
No, interesting. Kind of like, you know, you're speaking about like your adaptations and kind of impairments, and just kind of like thinking about like kind of coaches and stuff. How have you found like coaches you've worked with now and previously? How have they been at like adapting sessions? Has there been any like negative or positive experiences that you can kind of like share with us?
I think for me, I'm always a bit stubborn, so I'm like, I want to do everything, try and do it the kind of normal way, as such, like whether that's exercise, the training program, I'm like, right, I will do everything as it's supposed to be done, or what our perceived reason of coaching model is, and then once I hit that hurdle, then I'll change it, because I've adapted things in the past, and then I've kind of felt like I've gone off that path of, you know, kind of the ultimate training plan, and then I've gone so far off the path and then realised I probably didn't need to adapt it in the first place. So I think for me it's really key of learning individuals and as athletes. So for me, the thing about, you know, literally adapting my shoes and adapting some of my training plan to, I think with different disabilities there is that risk of injury, and I think especially, you know, in every sport the kind of key to being successful is staying injury free. Like first and foremost, so I think sitting down and just thinking about how the more mechanical side works, and those are the adaptations you need to make, rather than, you know, change the whole structure to start off with. And then I think, you know, it was kind of in athletics I was always in able-bodied training group, so I kind of adapted stuff naturally, knowing to my body. But it's definitely a learning curve, and I've been really lucky with Femi and Joe as an athletics coach, that they've kind of opened their eyes to loads of different disabilities and different categories, and they've had their own experience, and we've kind of had that dialogue to try and change, you know, but the small amounts, and try and keep on that ultimate training plan. For me, probably more effective, less so in the running sessions or the boat sessions, but actually the gym sessions. So with a lot of balance and coordination, so any leg stuff I need to do needs to be quite heavily adapted. But I think that open dialogue between athlete and coach, and also asking other athletes that maybe a different impairments but a similar kind of outcome, and then but you've got to kind of come up with your own strategies that work best for you.
I think I've been quite lucky to have some good mentors along every stage of my development. That have taught me to take full responsibility of how kind of I do things, because they're not disabled, they're body coaches. They don't know how it feels like to do certain exercises, what gets activated, what doesn't. So they've actually put the responsibility on me to tell them, and they get to understand over time. So I think now I've been quite lucky that the system's allowed us to not only kind of input to our training program. We have a very, very big say on what we do, and they just kind of follow. They kind of guide us with the science, but actually I know my body pretty well because of the education that I've had. The fact that I know the sport inside out, and actually, no offence to the coaches, they're not very good coaches, and they know that. Yeah, they know that. Their job is to try and guide me through that process, and my job is to give them the most honest, constructive feedback, so that guidance is informed. So I've been quite lucky in the sense of the communication has been really, really high, and the monitoring strategies that we put in means that actually we can predict things, but also know that there's some kind of changes coming before they happen. So you plan accordingly. So yeah, I've been quite lucky that I've had a huge say in what I've done over the last 6-7 years.
Yeah, like Ali, you were saying, like, I think your coaches don't know what it's like having your impairment. Like, I think like some of the conversations we've had like today, like yesterday and this morning, was like the lack of like coaches having a disability or like wanting to be involved in kind of disability sport. And like I know for myself, I find it quite sometimes there's like with my CP, I like feel like really strange sensations in my legs and stuff, and trying to explain to your coach I feel this, and it's quite hard for them to understand. I was just wondering if you guys had like kind of examples of like or challenges of like kind of like an able-bodied coach kind of understanding your impairment, not only from like a sporting context but also kind of life outside of sport.
I remember a particular time where Femi like taped his ankle up to try and make it completely stiff, because he was trying to understand, especially in running, of how that I didn't have kind of that propulsion. My foot just slapped along the floor.
Yeah.
So he literally went through that stage of he got like as much like gaffer tape as he could and like tape, but it did help, because he was trying to understand why I was kind of running a certain way, and the mechanics. I think with any sport it comes down to that mechanics of the movement, regardless of injury, or if the coach can try and then understand why every single disability would probably mean that you can't do the generic ultimate biomechanical model, and it's then making sure that you can adapt things to make sure that you get as close as possible for lack of injury, but also what's for best for you. So like literally things like that are trying to ankle, but also as we said before, like the dialogue of just chatting to each other and understanding what it feels like. And say that sometimes you're never going to be able to truly understand what it feels like, but if you can get there as close as possible, and that learning of they maybe observe you, so when you get that feeling in your legs, how then do you react in the session? How can you then, what can we change in the session to make you be able to complete some kind of session or something like that, what's best for the athlete? And I think that's really key, of chatting to each other, chatting to also past athletes that have been through the same, to not then, rather than take 5 years for that relationship to develop, it's only 2 or 3 years, and that's really key, to chat to other athletes and maybe other coaches that have coached athletes with disabilities.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that one?
I guess I get asked a lot, like, how do you bend so much without no leg drive? That's the one I get asked a lot, because people just don't understand that you can still have no legs and still bench quite well. I think I've been lucky with is that I've had such good mentors that obviously they don't know how it feels, but what they've done is they've gone, right, how can we not imagine how he feels, but what can we use to put us in his position? So we use a lot of biomechanics in terms of like the biomechanics of the movement in relation to my impairment. So it becomes very, very specific and individual, so they can understand the biomechanics of not just bench press, but benching with no legs. And obviously you can do that with any impairment, because there is a technique to bench press, but when it comes to different impairments, you're going to have a lot of challenges. So if you've got spinal cord injuries, you've got the balance. Amputees sometimes, because I've got one leg that's longer than the other one, I come down at probably like wonky, and that could hurt me, and like everyone's individual, but it's how do you get to understand that, and what mechanisms you use. And a lot of coaches think they understand it without any of that, and that's where the ego comes in. But a good coach would want to go actually forget about ego. I need to understand from a scientific point of view what they're going through and what their feedback is. And I think I've been quite lucky that I've had people around me that are willing to listen rather than give me their opinion that without any sort of data to prove what they're saying.
Yeah, and like you kind of like the kind of coaching relationships you've kind of described to me is like very much a lot of open communication, and like because you guys have been so successful, I'm just kind of like wondering what was like trying to word this, like what is it about the relationship, what have you guys done with you and your coaches and your support team that have allowed you to then go on and win the medals and be like the world champions and the Paralympic champions? Like what have you guys put in place, and like kind of like that kind of process?
Do you know, the weird thing, the thing that springs to mind moving to when I started canoeing is that I knew nothing about canoeing, so I had to put my ultimate trust in my coach. That I was like, right, you tell me what to do with technique and I'll do it. But then actually saying, but actually when it comes to my body, I know my body. So like we actually kind of had loads of conversations. It's a similar thing of where we've had loads of meetings where we actually, to understand each other. It does take a while. You don't just suddenly strike up a relationship with your coach and you can do it. But yeah, it was that kind of right when it comes down to technique or anything to do with what I'm doing in the boat, whatever you say goes, basically, with me and Colin. I was like, the one thing as well with me, like of actually getting my body to work as well. My coach will tell me what he wants me to do, but actually my brain works in the opposite way. So normally if I want my left arm to work, it's normally something to do with my left foot or something like that. But so knowing that, but that kind of that conversation of saying, right, well, then you tell me what to do, and it's all yours input with the kind of technical input. But then when it comes to my body and how it works, I need that input to kind of explain to you what's worked well in the past and what's not worked well in the past, and then we can kind of come up with a plan. And it's not kind of that you're never going to get it perfect straight away, but at least we've kind of had a little discussion on what does work, what doesn't work, and then at least we know that where to kind of have a starting point. And it is a lot of trial and error, but you can actually kind of get rid of a lot of those errors straight away if you have that kind of that chat together and worked out what previously, even if it's in a different sport or a different hobby or whatever, there is still some kind of learnings because you've had your body for however long.
Yeah.
I think in my case, I was actually quite I was the weird one of the group because before I came onto the program as a teenager, my technique was completely different than anybody else on the program. The way they taught people in the program was an able-bodied person teaching disabled people how to bench press. I was lucky that my first mentor used to be the national coach 20 years ago, so you see every impairment. So the way he coached me was individual, and probably, well, now I look back and go, actually, this was the safest technique and the most efficient technique. But when I came to the program, it was completely alien to the coaches. Why am I benching like this? And they weren't really open-minded as to why I wanted to change it. And I said to them, no, actually, you're going to injure a lot of these athletes because of the way they're technically quite poor. And nobody believed a 19-year-old. Why would you? I'm only 19 at the time. When you've got athletes that are older than me. So I guess what I'd say is probably like it's one, you have to know yourself. You have to be very confident in yourself that you can communicate that to the coach. But if the coach is not going to listen to you, I'd sack them off because it means that they're not willing to grow and they're not willing to listen. And I felt like, no offense to the coach at the time, but you had an able-bodied person who couldn't bench press telling me how to bench press. And then, for me, I just didn't get why. And because they were in charge, I had to kind of conform because at that age you don't want to rock the boat. But I was lucky enough that I had people around me to help me rock the boat too. And now, that bench press model, we've managed to come up with a bench press model now for everyone coming through that was literally based on what we did years ago. So actually, even though it was quite tough to begin with to implement them changes, now we've got a blueprint of how bench press should be, which is good. It means that the system has learned.
And have you had problems or challenges similar to Ali in terms of coaches not listening to kind of your insight and opinions about impairment and how you do your technique in your sport?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not been the extreme where I've been quite lucky with my coach where I've not had to, then kind of part ways. But we definitely had some heated discussions of them saying, well, you have to do it this way, and I'm like, you cannot do it this way. So that is not going to happen. So yeah, definitely there's been heated discussions, and it's not just, as I say, that's where the trial and error thing comes in, because if I get my own way, then I get to try something, and then if that doesn't work, I have to admit I was wrong, and then the coach can try something, and vice versa. But yeah, there's definitely been loads of discussions and discussions of it's the same, it's difference of opinions, isn't it? But as long as you kind of keep coming back to that common goal of you're both trying to get better, the coach trying to get you better, you're trying to get better, the coach trying to get better coach. So I think just listening to each other and understanding that, and especially I think with the impairments best, but also they might know best about something else, about the technique they're actually trying to get you to do or something like that. So coming to that happy medium in between and trying different things out is key.
No, I'm interested in to hear a bit about the challenges and stuff, and I was kind of wanting to have a bit of a discussion a bit about the challenges faced within like disability sport in general. Myself, like I've kind of pinpointed some kind of aspects that would be quite interesting to hear what you guys think or if you can add to it. Obviously, probably a big one that everyone involved in disability sports, the classifications, a major issue. How do we balance fairness but also trying to like progress the sport? Financial strains, and probably like, people like within disability sport sometimes feel like second class to like their able-bodied counterparts. So just kind of wondering what you guys think about that and like kind of how can we make it better the sport?
Oh God. you're my controversy. So when it comes to para sport in this country, the big issue that I have with it is that there's not enough para coaches, as in having a disability, that coach at the top level. I don't know why. I don't know why there is a lack of opportunity for us to progress to that sort of level, transfer or transition. Like Paralympic athletes have got a lot of knowledge. They know the sport inside out. They've lived it. They know what it takes. And then to having to you're pretty much stopped from doing it because there's no opportunities there, and that's a big frustration for me. So as I said, when I first came to the national team, I was being coached by somebody that had no clue, but apparently they were definitely the job at the time. And luckily I saw that. I didn't really take the advice, but it got me into a lot of trouble not taking the advice. I was kind of alienated from the team. I was the troublemaker. I was always in the naughty corner. I remember in training with the camps, I was like in the corner, nobody spoke to me. But yeah, I felt like if there was more para athletes like coaching, we might have a more kind of a diverse team that actually included, that actually gave an opportunity to athletes to coach when they retire, rather than athletes having to think about their careers afterwards. When it comes to, I guess, us being inferior to the Olympics, well, that's always going to happen with the media coverage that we get. Like, for example, the IPC said that these games were televised globally, but then they didn't televise free sports. How is that fair for the free sports that didn't get TV coverage? They said they're going to change it for Paris, but we'll see. But when we have an international federation that still isn't broadcasting every single sport to grow it, then we have a problem. Because they have to lead. But unfortunately they won't lead because they're controlled by the IOC, and the IOC will do what it wants, and it will tell them to do what it wants, and they have to listen because the IOC have got resources and the IPC don't. So actually, until we get our own identity, we're not going to change it, unless the IOC will be a massive turnaround and go, you know what, you can have whatever you want, but I doubt that.
Laura, do you have any points to add, or any other kind of aspects you think that perhaps are challenges within kind of disability sport and how you would improve it?
Yeah, I think similar to what Ali said, like for me, well, money makes the world go round and visibility is key. They're the kind of two huge things, and I think we're kind of told to be grateful quite a lot of the time for what we have got, and you look back 20 years and disability sport is a lot more out there, and it's less so much like oh well done, you went and did some sport, to actually elite athletes that are training. And I think me and my teammate now have a project to try and get on the able-bodied team as canoeing for our own benefit, but also to prove a point. But it shouldn't be that we have to do that to break through, to prove a point that we're just as good as able-bodied athletes, just that we've got an impairment that then holds you back, and that's the whole point of disability sport. But it shouldn't be the kind of athletes themselves or individuals having to prove a massive point to actually get kind of visibility. But unfortunately, that's, I say, for disability sport, for women's sport, it's just shown, like even recently, the amount of more women's sport that's been shown, all of a sudden there's loads more interest into it. All of a sudden there's loads more money coming into it, just by BBC putting on some rugby and football games of women's sport. And people say, oh, it actually is good women's sport. But it is good. Women's sport is good. Disability sport is good. Everything, like for me, sport is sport, and it's competition, and it's great. There's just different areas of sport, and I do think it really comes down to visibility, but also that unfortunately it does come down to money, but it is growing, and it kind of just takes more and more people to get involved in sport. And you say then to breed the coaches, if there's more visibility, disability sport, more women into it, there are going to be more people getting involved and more coaches and more disabled people wanting to be a coach and going down that route and realising that it is an opportunity, but it's that fight to get there.
Yeah.
You're starting on the back foot compared to other sports. So there is an upward trajectory, but making sure that it does stay as an upward trajectory and keeps going. But it kind of is a lot down to the athletes at the moment, and so it's kind of taking to get out there more in the media. And as Ali said, like, the TV doesn't show a sport, how's that sport expected to grow? And a lot of it, for me, the really key thing down to it is visibility and getting it out there.
Yeah, and you've kind of said a bit about, sorry, I've lost my track of thought, about like coaches, disability coaching. I was just wondering, have any of you been coached by somebody with a disability, or know anyone, even in the crowd? How many people, say your children who've gone to yourself, how many of you guys have been coached by somebody with a disability? So it's actually quite good for a crowd, actually, for the size, but yeah, there's hardly very many, to be honest. Like, I know from my own experience, I don't think I've been coached by anybody really with a disability, maybe one or two I've seen. How about you guys?
No, I haven't personally, no.
Yeah, once when I was younger. But yeah, only once.
So how do you think we could then try and, like, you know, we've got a really good Paralympics team right now, some really like talented athletes. How do you think that we can try and retain them to kind of be involved in the sport within like a coaching kind of job?
I think that's the key, and not just into coaching jobs, but to in other roles within organisations, within British curling, in British athletics. Like, they say, how are you supposed to increase visibility and increase their voice if you don't have, you know, it's proven in any aspect. If you've got someone with an organisation with, you know, an interest and wants to develop something, that then comes to the forefront. So it's keep really retaining athletes in sport, and I think that's looking after them while they're still in sport. But also, I think there is more and more now about the kind of life after sport with athletes, and not kind of all of a sudden you drop from funding, see you later. It is still there, don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect thing, but it's a bit more that the transition of, I think it is really key to, you know, there's charities out there like Switch to Play that about the mentalities of the athletes have to get into business roles and saying you need to employ athletes. Well, why aren't the federations themselves employing athletes and keeping them in there when it's proven of the qualities that athletes have from all sports, of, you know, kind of hot property of getting them into business roles, or actually let's keep them in the federations, and that's going to strive for change, and they're going to work their way up with there. So I think, I don't know the exact time.
No.
I think I'd be in that position if I'd have a good role if I had the answer to that, but of how to keep athletes in there. But I do think it's really key to have that wide range of visibility.
Yeah, Ali, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think, from my point of view, the system does a lot in terms of now giving you opportunities whilst you're competing, but it never promotes initiatives that helps you become a coach if you want to. They'll talk to you about life outside of the competition environment, like different work sectors, but nobody's ever mentioned to me, oh, actually, you've got 20 years experience in how to bench press, you're quite good. If you want to coach, we can get your coaching methods, we'll pay for them.
Yeah.
Because we can see that in you. Nobody's ever approached me and said, you know, like, obviously my work's anti-doping, and they think I'm going to pursue that, but actually I've got so much knowledge when it comes to my sport that actually they don't really use it. And then obviously when I do eventually retire, that will be a waste. So I think there's no real initiative to actually encourage athletes to coach after they compete, after they finish. There's no real options out there.
Yeah, and it was actually something that Laura said, you kind of spoke a bit about fund and kind of like what you do after sport, and I know sometimes for like me, and listening to other athletes, sometimes I feel like, especially kind of I don't know if you guys agree, but like disability sport, very like in the kind of Paralympic side and elite side is all very much medals, and people caring about where you've placed, and sometimes if you haven't won the gold, you're treated differently and you're not as much of a priority. And it's kind of wondering if you guys have ever kind of felt the effects of maybe not being the number one and how that's made you feel, kind of how that's affected you not only in your sport, kind of like personal kind of issues, because I've myself have struggled with that.
Yeah, I think, well, it's part of sport, isn't it? Sometimes you can be a top and sometimes you can not be. But yeah, in athletics, I say I was always kind of, I'd won European medals, but I was always outside of the world medals, and then all of a sudden, you do feel like you're second class citizen to especially like at the championships, which is fine. Like obviously, there's the media presence and that within the athletes, but it's then when in the staff and things like that, and there is that hierarchy, and I get within sport there has to be that's what the levels of funding are. There are different levels of funding to what then support you get, but it's very. I mean, I spoke to other athletes of having an injury and then kind of losing their funding, and then it's kind of then suddenly dropped of that care, just the continuity and the support of you are more than just an athlete. And I get that there's money involved and there's funding involved, but there seems to be a lot of steep jumps one way or the other, and I do think that is a key. I think within there obviously is their money and their funding is revolved around medals, and there is that medal culture, but there's kind of a time and a place I think for the balance, and I do think especially from coming in parasport there is kind of a unique section that there are sometimes young athletes, and you were really young when you won your first medal, and it's not always 30-year-old athletes winning medals. There's sometimes 12, 15-year-old athletes winning medals, and they require a completely different level of support and understanding of navigating that journey. And in parasport you can, we've had people come in for a year to the programme, win a gold medal and then disappear because they've changed category or the classification has moved on, and that's actually, you as an athlete have still got better and you've still improved, so you've got better, you've improved, but then all of a sudden you're treated completely differently because you're not winning medals anymore. But that's just because the sport has moved on, and that kind of wider support of developing athletes. There are athletes that have luckily come back from that and then done really well, but there are athletes that have been completely lost, and that's had a huge effect on them. So it's that continuity, I think, for me is really key.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about that?
I think it's the culture of the sport. The culture of, well, I know some parasports, there's culture of it's all about winning. If you don't win a gold medal, then silver and bronze is not good enough, and you feel like you've failed if it's less than gold. And I guess I've been quite lucky again because the kind of the team I have around me, they were very adamant from the beginning that every athlete's voice was important, and the superstars did not get treated differently than the juniors coming through, and everyone had a voice. So even though I'm not picking my powers, you can say that Ali was the face. Actually, I had exactly the same say that everybody else. I was treated like exactly the same. In fact, probably harsher to raise my standard for the kids coming through. So actually, the responsibility of me was actually much bigger. Where a lot of other coaches or other sports are, if you're not a gold medalist, you don't really want to know. And I guess I think sports have to put their culture when it comes to how they support athletes, because I know the bigger sports struggle with that.
Yeah, it's something I don't know if you guys noticed in the village and the branding and we had like posters around in our rooms and stuff, and they were all very much centred around we've won so many medals. And it was actually, I was listening to somebody else speak, and I was like, well, hang on, it just seems like it's just driving a message about like medals are everything, and I guess you can either take that as like motivation, or it might be a bit off-putting or a bit like, oh, I've come away and see you've done really well, and then you've not won a medal, and that may make you feel like, oh, you've not done as well for the team and stuff. And I think that's just something that I noticed. I don't know if you guys felt that or.
No, I completely noticed it, and I've been on the flip side. I came away from Tokyo with a gold, but Rio came away with 2 fifth places. But actually, both of them I achieved my best, and both of them I essentially did a PB and won. And like I think for me in Rio I went in ranked like 8th, and so for me I outdid my ranking, performed my best, ran PBs, and for me that was my medal, but as you say, then you kind of are treated then, but you know, people, the minute you come back from a game, you're like, oh, so did you win a wet medal? And you're like, no, and they're like, oh, well, never mind. I'm like, yeah, but
Yes.
so I do think, and I get that you know, especially, you know, around UK sport, there is that, you know, prevalence on they have to get so many medals to keep money, but that's one string of the bow, and there's loads of others in athlete development. And for me, the whole reason most of us got into sport was because you love sport. You didn't get into sport as a 4-year-old girl going, I want to win a gold medal. Like, that might be an aspiration, that might be a goal, but like, I do sport to do sport, and I do sport for the love of it, regardless of whether or not I win a gold medal. I obviously train every day and push myself to the limits because I want to go and try and win a medal, but that's the beauty of sport. You can't, even if you work harder, and I hate when people go, oh, I work harder than that person. Like, how do you know? You never know that, but like, you know, you work harder and hard, everyone works really hard, and only one person in each event can come away with a medal. What's that to put that someone else hasn't worked as hard or hasn't had as, you know, good a journey? And I do get that there is that, you know, performance sport is about performance, but then there has to be those other strings of the bow that are really key, that, you know, just making a Paralympic GB team is amazing. And there's also people, like I know in canoeing, for instance, we were only allowed one person per country in an event. We had the World Championships a week later. I won the gold and my teammate won silver. She was the second fastest person in the world, yet she wasn't allowed to go to the Paralympic Games because you only allowed one person. And so does that put her achievement of, oh, you didn't get to go to the Paralympics and get a medal? She would have got a medal if she would have been there. You know, there's qualification to get in there, and there's other athletes that within sport, it's not just about the Paralympic Games, it's not just about medals, but it is about sport as a collective. And I think for me, sport, and I'm biased, but like, and I'm a PE teacher, I was always like, you can teach anything through sport and the skills you get through sport, and I think that's what, as I say about, like, you know, especially that's why there's a drive for, you know, the minority sports, minority people, the, you know, female sport getting out there, because getting young people into sport is really key, and that for me is the main thing. And I get that there is that drive on medals in UK sport, but there's so much more to it. And if you look after those athletes first that you have invested in, you've invested in them for years, so you still look after them even if they're not performing to what your level is. And that's then the key, is drive on more coaches retaining in the sport, push more people, young people, to get in sport with disabilities from minority backgrounds. That's what is key, not just winning the medals.
Yeah, no, 100%. I just quite like, Ali, do you want to add it to that? Or?
I think you covered it.
Happy with that?
Damn it, I get off one, you take the next one.
But I think, is that us then, Tabo, or time?
Has anyone got any questions?
Any questions? Go ahead.
Just one for you, Laura. I tried out canoeing, like kayaking recently.
Yes.
It was great fun, because we moved to a new place with the river. Where would I find information, if there is any information out there already, about how to get the best out of kayaking without using the legs? Because when I was like, oh, I'll get a kayak, because I can just sit down, it's just sitting down, I don't have to use my legs, so I'm the same as my partner. But again, she's thrashing me, because she's got the use of her legs and can engage those, you know. And so it's the same problem we're having with cycling, where I had cycling, foot cycling. So is there information out there for?
Yeah, this is the annoying thing. There is information out there, but they just don't shout about it. Which I was like, you know, I found out that there's loads of canoe clubs, and I had absolutely no idea that there's, you know, when people think, oh, canoe, you can't do it in school, or it's not very accessible. It's actually really accessible. There are loads of clubs, and I know that British Canoeing are doing a big drive with training loads of clubs about coaching disabilities and different disabilities. And so there is ways out, and actually all clubs have sent resources from British Canoeing about that, and so there are local clubs, and there is loads of information on British Canoeing. It's just they don't shout about it. Like, I'd be like, if I had all this information, they've done all the hard work of doing all the information, but it's just not out there. So there is. I can put you in touch with someone that will give you direct, that he's kind of the club liaison within Paris, so he is literally going out and training clubs into how to coach different disabilities. But yeah, it is hidden on a website somewhere, but it should be out there.
So, with you over at the back, yeah?
When you finish elite sport then, do you intend to be coaches?
Yeah, well, I currently coach a small group. I've only just started out, so I coach some young kids in the sport like frame running. So it's a frame that helps support them when they're running. I'm doing a coaching degree, so that's kind of what I hope to get involved in. How about you guys?
I was lucky enough to be assistant coach at the Invictus Games in 2018 for the powerlifting. But I don't think coaching will be my thing going forward, because my passion is anti-doping and governance. So I'm going to the top level. might as well change it from the top. Yeah. So I've done coaching, but it won't be at that level, I don't think, after that time.
Yeah, I definitely. I don't know if I'm going to be a specific defined coach. I like doing everything, but I coach at the moment. I was saying to Maria earlier, I went from being a PE teacher and training full time. That was the most stressful year of my life. I wouldn't advise it. So then I went full time training, and I had that kind of gap in my life. And I really think that the balance is really key. That, you know, when you have the good days of training, it's great. But when you have the bad days, then not have anything else. So I emailed my local school and was like, "Do you need any sports coaches?" And they said, "Yeah, start next week." And that was 4 years ago, and they've not got rid of me yet. So it's getting that balance. So I do, whether it's defining, like maybe not as an elite coach as such, I might do that kind of a bit on the side. But for me, the passion is young people and opening their eyes to different sports and different activities. So yeah, coaching in schools and going around schools is what I think I'd like to do.
Sorry, I need to close the session because Maria needs to get onto a train back to Scotland. That's the only thing.
Just a little train.
Just a little. Well, it's a bit of a train. So if you can just put your hands together for these guys. Did an outstanding job, and I think for me some of the keys were around, open communication with coaches leads to really effective adaptation, understanding, but you need a coach whose willingness to learn, to be open, to have these kind of discussions, and I think for me the important thing for the three of you and some of the lessons that I've learned here is around being advocates for change wherever you are, and I think the fact that you're coaching, you're doing anti-doping. I reckon you've got so many different areas that you can go into to bring about change as well. And I think for me the exciting thing is looking to see where they're going to end up in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But thank you for giving your time today to share those amazing insights. And right, we'll get you onto the train.
Thank you very much, everyone.